Thank you all, and welcome to Great Bear as well. It was gratifying to sit here next to Ryan and hear that they just got most of their major permits taken care of last week. That means the state, North Slope Borough, everybody's kind of coordinating well, which is great news for Great Bear and great news for Alaskans. You know, it's my honor to be back at the Chamber, and it's that time of year when we think about the holiday season, but it's also that time of year when the Constitution says the governor gets to propose a budget to the legislature. And that's exactly what we're doing today. Because today I propose a balanced budget that is more than $800 million lower in total spending in the current year and $600 million lower in unrestricted general fund spending. We deleted 284 vacant full-time and part-time positions and asked agencies to reallocate the funding to show where it is needed. Effectively, it trues up, or more honestly reflects where that spending is already being utilized. With that lower starting point on dollars and positions, we can have a public conversation with the legislature about needs versus wants, about efficiencies, and about more effective use of the public's dollars. In its restraint, the budget proposal will send a strong message that our spending must not spike up just because the state has surplus funds. And indeed, I don't expect the legislature to spend in the next year beyond what it did with my signature this year. Our administration's fiscal responsibility, it's evidenced by a record. Record vetoes that I exercised across the last 2 years, totaling $700 million. It's evidenced by the budget discipline that our commissioners and leadership exacted to get the budget proposal before you today. What many of you maybe don't recognize is that this budget process started in July. And we've got a lot of our commissioners here with us. Our lieutenant governor is here with us. These commissioners and their staffs have been working with Karen Rayfeld at Office of Management and Budget and our senior staff in the governor's office to present this starting point for the conversation today. Our fiscal responsibility is evidenced by results for Alaskans, and results like fewer Alaskans having to wait in line at DMV because you can complete a license renewal online or through the mail. Results like quicker response time from the Department of Commerce to those Alaskans who want to form small to mid-sized businesses and Alaska corporations. Results like performance scholarship funding a portion of college or job training programs for high school graduates in 2011 who earned them. In our proposed budget release today, we're going to continue to focus on fiscal responsibility and on results. On the revenue side, we enjoy a pretty good picture. Unlike most states, we have savings in the bank and we have healthy surpluses. Alaska has nearly $13 billion in savings, not counting the permanent fund. And with this budget, we project we will still have surplus revenue of $3.7 billion. So after the spending proposed in this budget, Alaska will have $3.7 billion to put into the bank or to invest in other ways. If we maintain our spending discipline, we can put billions in savings this year to draw from in more lean years and use some to leverage long-term investments. On the spending side, you know, Alaska's Constitution guides our priorities: resource development, education, public safety, transportation infrastructure. Resource development, as you all know, is crucial to our state's economy. So this budget proposes to increase access to Alaska's resources. Our Roads to Resources initiative will be funded at $28.5 million. Includes accessing oil and gas-rich lands around Umiat, helping to open access to the Ambler Mining District, to open up mining lands in a route to Tanana, and to fund work on the Klondike Industrial Use Highway outside of Skagway, to name a few. The budget's also aimed at streamlining the state's permitting processes. With $3.3 million in new dollars, we intend to provide more timely decision-making, more unified decision-making for those seeking permits, whether for land sales and transfers, resource development applications of all kinds. We're going to obtain more critical data about Alaska's rare earth elements and strategic minerals. We'll initiate a geologic assessment of shale oil on the North Slope and other areas of Alaska. And on the gas line, I led this fall by saying the parties and projects need to align and consolidate around a pipeline in Alaska to Tidewater. This budget funds $60 million for a GEA reimbursement as they realign around on Alaska line to Tidewater, and $21 million for Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation's work. One thing often overlooked in growing an economy is the value of a good map. USGS topo maps of Alaska are more than 50 years old. They're inaccurate, they don't meet national mapping standards. Accurate elevation data related to mountains, hills, passes, vital to responsible resource and economic development, vital to aviation safety, modern day emergency response, routing for roads and pipelines. So to address this, we've proposed and funded a statewide digital mapping initiative. $3 million of state funds will leverage $12 million of federal funds for a statewide digital mapping initiative. So funding roads to resources, more timely permits, rare earths assessment, statewide digital mapping, it's all about jobs. It's about creating those opportunities for Alaskans to move forward. Turning to education. As I touched on earlier, more than 2,000 Alaska students qualified for Alaska Performance Scholarships. This from the high school class of 2011. We pioneered these scholarships because to be competitive in this world, our young people have got to take more rigorous high school coursework. And to get them to take more rigorous coursework, we employed that age-old concept of more work equals reward. Alaska's high school students can earn scholarships to an in-state post-secondary education through their own efforts. And in this budget, I've proposed ongoing performance scholarship funding for the class of 2011, as well as providing scholarship funding for those high school graduates in the class of 2012 who earned them. The budget also forward funds and fully funds the K-12 public education funding formula and pupil transportation program. So along with providing access to more resource development, funding education initiatives, our budget prioritizes public safety. We're going to add 16 law enforcement officers across this state, most of whom will live in villages that have none. I expect that 15 of these 16 law enforcement officers will actually live in a village that has no officer right now. Places where people wait days to get a response when they need help. Our budget proposal also adds funding for domestic violence shelters and housing for victims, and it provides screening and services for children traumatized by sexual abuse. We're not going to rest in our state while our young people and other Alaskans are traumatized and victimized by domestic violence and sexual assault. Every able Alaska family also needs to be ready for natural disasters. We need to be ready with 7 days of safe drinking water and food supplies. If you think about our distance from the lower 48, you think about the remoteness even from our Canadian neighbors. If we have a major earthquake here in this town, for example, or if one occurred in the Seattle area, cutting off groceries and commodities from Seattle, restoration of Alaska's supply chain could easily take 7 days to reestablish. And in the meantime, our grocery store shelves would be empty, we'd be on our own. Also, in a large-scale disaster, families could be without their homes or access to their stored provisions. And for that reason, our budget proposal includes a request for $4.9 million for emergency food supplies. This past legislative session, we began to systematically build our capacity to address large-scale disasters. The legislature joined me in funding water purifiers, as well as electric generators. This next step has to do with purchasing dehydrated food that can be safely stored for use in these kinds of emergency situations. Lastly, in the realm of public safety, Alaska State Troopers are called to remote areas under adverse weather conditions for law enforcement, for search and rescue, for other emergencies. In these situations, the troopers need a helicopter equipped for missions, and our budget proposal advances a funding request for this vital equipment. Before moving more directly into transportation and infrastructure, or a broader overview of the capital budget, let's go to the numbers. So what does the fiscal year 2013 budget total? The operating and capital budgets add up to $12.1 billion in total funds. $6.4 billion of that is state general funds. So $6.4 billion of that is from recurring revenue. The rest of it's federal dollars and the like. Excluding permanent fund dividend payments, the general fund budget is at $612 million less than the current year. Overall, this represents a decrease of 8.7% in state general fund spending. But let's not kid ourselves, because the state operating budget is increasing. It's going up in a few key areas the public deserves to know about. The proposed state general fund operating budget increases 4.5%. Some of those significant increases that are built into that are unfunded pension liability. From years and years ago of the earlier pension system, we have an escalating pension obligation of an unfunded liability. At this point, I believe it's $11 billion and rising. We're on a payment schedule right now that is an increasing payment schedule over time. In the current year, we funded $470 million towards this unfunded pension liability. And on top of that, every year, we have to fund pensions for continuing employees right now. So $470 million is being paid in the current year. $610 million has to be paid in the next year. That's a $131 million increase just in the operating line item, just to stay current with the payment schedule to make sure we can meet that unfunded liability. This is an area that I'm working with the Alaska Retirement Management Board to address. And I just want you to know that, like the federal government has to deal with Social Security and Medicare as its elephant in the room, our elephant in the room financially is this unfunded pension liability that we will deal with. Another area besides the unfunded pension liability of increases, Medicaid formula costs. Those are increasing just by the formula alone, so by law, $131 million. $45 million of that is state money, the rest of it is federal money. That's the mandated expanded eligibility pools that we've been seeing from the federal government. Goose Creek Correctional Center, this is another one. There's a facility across the way in the Mat-Su Borough that was built before it was funded and appropriated before our time. It's a facility that needs to be open. That increased cost will be $29 million. And then on top of that, of course, we've got employee labor contracts increasing by $66 million. So you can add all that up and see that there are several hundreds of millions of dollars increased to the operating budget before we even get started restraining things. The proposed capital budget totals $1.8 billion. That includes $882 million from the state and the rest primarily federal funds. We've already talked about some key funding for access to resources, but here's the larger transportation, infrastructure, and energy picture that we're aiming at to unleash more economic opportunity for Alaskans. We propose funding $136 million in state funds to leverage over $798 million in federal funds. So basically $136 million for $800 million in federal funds. We propose to fund, therefore, over $1 billion for infrastructure projects, including roads, airports, marine highway system, municipal water and sewer, harbors, deferred maintenance, all of that's included. On the energy side, we also have energy-related projects. I'm not going to read the list of projects, but this will give you a sense for where the energy proposals are today. One key project that you're not seeing up here that we remain firmly committed to is the Susitna-Watana project. What we did last year is we funded $65 million for 2 years of work. We're not putting forth a funding request at this time for that project because we're still using the money that was appropriated in the current year. So I don't want anybody to think that we are not committed to Susitna-Watana. We are firmly committed to that, and we will continue to fund that as needed. On school major maintenance projects, there's an actual maintenance list that is put together and prioritized. We're funding down that list to 14 projects. Statewide ports, let me go to that because this is a significant area. Too often, the economic development potential of ports are overlooked. In many of our smaller communities, you'll hear it said that ports are the fisherman's road to resources. And certainly in our larger communities, our ports are an economic hub and conduit for commerce. I will ask the legislature to join me in putting to the voters a statewide GEO-bond ports package for approval in November 2012. And the reason for a bond package for this, rather than using state cash, is this. Currently, we earn more on our state savings accounts than the cost to finance this bond package if these bonds were issued today. So at least for this amount of money, for this bond package that we're proposing, which is at $350 million that the voters will be asked whether or not they approve in November, For that package, we can make more money keeping our money in savings than the cost of financing. If that reverses at some point, we have the savings to pay down that debt. On that GO bond package, we're proposing the following. Port of Anchorage, $200 million. Matsu Borough, Port McKenzie rail extension at $110 million. The City of Seward, to make it into a community development quota home port, $10 million. Bristol Bay Borough port improvements at Naknek, $10 million. City of Amonic port improvements at $10 million. And the Ketchikan Gateway Borough at $10 million. Those are Ward Cove port improvements. These projects will provide access and infrastructure needed to support economic development across Alaska. I have briefed legislators this morning and yesterday on what we're proposing here. And I've said, this is my basis for putting forward a GO bond package, the economic development potential for Alaska, and because I think in today's conditions, it makes sense to finance this $350 million rather than spend the cash on it. I have let them know that I'm open to the conversation though, and open to public input throughout the process, and I'll continue to maintain that openness. Our proposed budget for fiscal year 2013 will spend considerably less than what the fall forecast is projecting for available revenue, as I've said. As I indicated, these budget proposals leave the state with $3.7 billion in surplus revenue. We exercise restraint amidst this surplus because of the uncertain future we face. Oil production is declining, and oil prices can be volatile. The European debt crisis threatens not only Europe, but the United States, potentially heading into recession in 2012. And certainly our own federal fiscal situation and our $15 trillion national debt is reason for concern. Alaska, on the other hand, will lead in fiscal responsibility. We will exercise spending restraint, we'll budget for results, we'll be accountable for our actions, and we're going to save for the future. So now it's the legislature's turn with our administration, and it's the public's turn to have some input when this all gets released today. We'll have 90 days in the regular session to work together on crafting a budget. I firmly believe that if we do not set a lower starting point for our spending, that we will overspend and create more vulnerability for ourselves as a state down the road. So, Anchorage Chamber, I thank you for letting me unveil the highlights of our proposed budget, and I look forward to the public discourse. I think we've got some time for some questions as well.
Looks like we've got plenty of time.
Plenty of time, okay. Well, let's have a discussion then.